Could you please come up here? Thank you. And could you identify yourself for the record?
Jeff White, the building official for Calaveras County. We don't see that as it'll change the fees so much as it'll change some of the process that the builders are going to have to identify during the course of construction. There's water conservation routines in there. There's moisture requirements for the envelope before it gets covered. There's recycling of different building materials that will be expected to be taken care of, along with some other issues that hard surfaces. It's a two-tier system. One tier is mandated as the code is adopted. The second tier would be voluntary, which in essence would be 30% higher in the regard of the CEC compliance, which is a California energy compliance, which can be very difficult. So most of the jurisdictions are going to accept the code as it is, along with the international code, which we will be seeing at the same time. There's some regulation on water use with appliances and fixtures and that sort of thing. So it's from what I've seen talking to Doug Hensel from HCD and the Building Standards Commission.
Could you please speak in English? Thank you.
He's HCD, of course, the Housing Community Development. That they had a long and deliberate review of these codes, and they will be with us starting January 2011. Also, there's another interesting thing that will be required in new housing will be sprinklers, residential sprinklers. So it's, I met with a state fire marshal last Friday. It's not as horrible as it first sounded. It's actually a life safety element, which allows the occupancy to evacuate the building during a fire event. The sprinkler heads will engage in the part of the house that's where the fire's has started, and it allows the people to get out, and it's not anything more than a health safety requirement. And typically the heads can be calculated to where most residences can use a pressurized tank that would probably be a little more than 300 gallons at the most. So it's actually a pretty good way to go for residential sprinklers compared to what we first thought it was going to be. So I think those are all these things that we'll be looking at in the near future. The next 6 months, we'll be dealing with these things.
Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick question. Jeff.
Yes. Okay.
With the new mandates on a 1,500 square foot home, how much will that increase the cost of construction?
On the green I don't have any estimates.
No estimates whatsoever?
No, I don't have any estimates. I think that's going to be something that will be worked out through the process of getting familiar with dealing with the aspects of the codes as they are. But I don't have any estimates at this time.
Well, when they reviewed all the codes, they didn't come up with a cost analysis of what the additional cost would be?
I've heard different numbers for, let's take the 1,500 square foot house, for example. I've heard numbers run anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 overall in extra cost above and beyond what would be a typical house that you'd build today rather than 2011. But again, it's some of the things that if you didn't do irrigation, for instance, you wouldn't need to have to comply with the irrigation mandate of the code, because which would cost you, say, a couple $1,000s just to do that. If you didn't have any need for irrigation for your lawns or extravagant lawns or anything like that, you could reduce that part right out.
We're all going to be reduced to rock gardens?
Well, they take a lot less mowing.
Up to keep the weeds out?
My rock garden has a lot less mowing than I have.
Just a quick comment, because it was a very heated discussion at the Regional Council of Rural Counties meeting last Thursday on the residential sprinklers. And it was twofold. Number one is I believe there is going to be a substantial cost in putting sprinkler systems in residences, but even the greater concern in many of the rural counties was that those systems have to always be charged. And there's certain areas, in higher elevation, start with Arnold, that if you leave your house, you're going to have to leave the thermostat up at 40 or degrees or something, because the worry is that when someone's not there, they'll freeze. Because they always have to be charged. And there's places like Bridgeport you can get 40 degrees below, and there are a lot of other places. So there's going to be a lot of issues with the sprinkler systems, particularly if you go on vacation in the winter. Or you just go on vacation in the winter for a week, and you come back and the system froze and then thawed, and you have a huge flood in your house. So there's going to be issues there are going to be a lot of issues associated, I think, with that residential.
We did talk about that Friday, and the simple answer to that is in the areas where you would be subject to freezing, you'd put insulation or heat tape on those pipes while you're there, of course. If you leave, you turn off the system, drain everything, nobody's there, so there's no reason for the life safety element of this code to be of a concern.
At the RCRC meeting, the feeling was the way it's being proposed is it has to be fully charged.
It has to be fully charged when the building's occupied. If you leave on vacation for 2 weeks, you can turn the system off and drain it.
The sense I had from that discussion was they're not going to give you an option of draining the system, because no one's going around and monitoring it, and they're going to require you to keep it fully charged, unless they're going to change the rule. But then how do you keep people from saying, I don't even want a chance of this thing going off because of, I'm lighting a candle in my bedroom, or I'm, lighting a fire and it's smoking a little bit, and I'm just going to not charge it and leave it not charged because it's in the discretion of the homeowner.
Well, yes, that's like smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors or any other life safety element. The State Fire Marshal has told us that it's due to the fact of the intent of the code that if you are not that there's no occupants in the building, it can be basically drained and deactivated where freezing is a concern, because the idea is there's no occupants that need to be protected while the building's vacant. And the maintenance of the system is on the occupant. They're unlike commercial sprinkler installations that require annual maintenance or annual inspections. So it's up to whoever owns the sprinkler, just like your smoke detector and the carbon monoxide detectors will be required as well.
Okay. And the third element on that, since we're on it, is there was a strong feeling, I guess, talking to some of the home insurance companies, that if your house is sprinklered, you will probably pay a greater insurance rate because they're going to view that as a greater risk of a potential for damage. And I don't think that's been quantified, but it was actively discussed.
Yes, of course, the other side of that is because you have sprinklers, your insurance would go down. So there's both sides of that argument.
Okay, anything else, Mr. Tucker?
That's it.
Mr. Tuffanelli, would you like to?
I have one other comment, and that has to do with homeless shelters or emergency shelters. It says, and I was apparently there's only one emergency shelter with beds here in the county. But we're going to amend the zoning for emergency shelters. The county shall amend the zoning ordinance to allow emergency shelters by right, i.e. as permitted use without a conditional use permit or other discretionary review process, in at least one of the following zones: professional offices, which is CP, a local commercial, C1, or general commercial, C2. Additionally, the county shall adopt and develop standards for emergency shelters that encourage and facilitate the development of emergency shelters and only subject emergency shelters to the same development and management standards that apply to other allowed uses within the same zone, which I'm taking that to mean that you're going to come back to us in 6 months and say, take your pick, 1, 2, 3 of these zones that you like allowable uses to be in. If somebody wants to open a shelter within the district, but it doesn't address the same that it's saying for low-income houses. In other words, the permitting process, or what have you, or reduced fees to open the shelter. If we're going to go down that road for this, I think that needs to apply the same for the emergency shelter. If somebody would like to put one in, build one, open one up, so forth.
So if I hear you correctly, you're suggesting that some sort of fee reduction or fee waiver would be applicable for emergency shelter development as well. Okay. I mean, that's probably something that I imagine the state would probably be perfectly happy to accept. I wanted to comment on a couple of the other things you mentioned. One was the second unit accessory dwelling issue. And again, this is a compatibility issue with state law. Right now, our code is not consistent with state law. The way second units are currently set up is that we require what's called an administrative use permit to do an accessory dwelling unit. The state says you can't have any sort of special permitting process. They're allowed by right in any residential district. So we come back to you with an amendment that essentially said that.
Well, one of the questions I had, if you would stop right there on that, and I guess I have to see it when you come back to us in 6 months, because it doesn't address, it says allow second units and accessory units, which it doesn't limit the amount of units on any property.
Well, generally speaking, where there's one dwelling unit allowed, there's one secondary dwelling unit allowed.
I understand.
And we clarify that in the code, obviously, because that has been an issue in other places.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So that's something that we could clarify.
George, would there still be the parcel size limit? I mean, 1 acre or more?
The way I understand it, the state has not essentially taken all of the regulatory aspects of establishing second units away from local governments. For example, you can establish setbacks and height limitations and even size limitations that we currently don't have. So as long as those are standards in the code that could be applied to a building permit, it's allowable.
So if you have a 1/4 acre or 1/2 acre, then you could or could not?
Well, by the current standard, you could not.
Correct. Is this saying that you then can?
No.
Okay. It's just saying in an R1, you can 1 acre minimum. We can still say that.
I think we can still establish a minimum lot size standard, unless I'm mistaken. I don't think that's something the state has dictated to us at this point in time.
I had one other thing. I didn't mean to stop you, but I had it outlined here. And it says, the county shall amend the zoning code to eliminate single-family houses as permitted uses in the R2 and R3 zoning districts, unless built to at least 60% of the maximum density for those zones. So we're in the process of a general plan update, and a lot of it is being rezoned, some of it. And I happen to fall in an R2 zone. Don't I have the right to at least put my house on that property if I own it? If we're amending the zones, and I have to go through a zone change in order to put a single-family home on my property that I own.
Yeah, what's suggested here is a change to the list of permitted uses. That's correct. So currently, for example, in R3, you can have a single-family residence. The policy is here, and the implementation is to require a certain amount of density on those parcels that can accommodate that density.
I can't support that.
And
I didn't understand what that meant either. So if you have Gary subdivision, which is predominantly R1, and his parcel's an R2, and he wants to build a single family on an R2, he will not be able to?
if it was not a permitted use by right.
So what we're doing...
Yeah, unless he's meeting 60% of the density for that particular
And
parcel.
what does 60%... I didn't understand what that meant. 60%
Of the allowable density, for example,
the allowable density in that subdivision?
as it relates to that parcel, yes. Right.
You know what? I read it, I still don't understand.
It's obviously, there's a calculation that needs to be made, obviously.
I can't agree with that.
I guess because I don't understand what it means. I mean, I've read it, and I understand we had a project in Valley Springs. I mean, that's sort of what comes to mind. I don't remember just a while ago where it was. And it had to do with single families on R2 zoning. I don't understand 60% of the maximum density for those zones. I don't understand that
For
statement.
example, in an R3, the maximum density, I believe, is 12 units per acre. All right, so if you had a 1 acre parcel, 60% of that would be the minimum number of units that you could have on that parcel under this program. So about 8 units.
So 8 units, you have to build 8 units in order to
So,
build your house on your property.
so on his R2 zone, he can build a single family
Well, he
and
can
then
build-
parcel off after he builds 8
Or
units?
build additional units on the same parcel, actually. As long as it meets the minimum density requirement.
Where did this come from?
Well, the board's talked about it before.
I think the way the state saw this, and this was a topic of discussion with HCD, is that by allowing the single-family residential use, 1 unit on any size parcel, you're essentially precluding the multifamily development that's possible on that site. And we've identified these sites as being, potential affordable housing sites.
So if he only has, if his parcel's the only one that's an R2, or it's 100 units, I don't know how big it is, unit subdivision, and they're all pretty R1s except for 10% of them, or what have you. Those 10 parcels have to
Meet that standard.
remain R2.
Well, that's not to say they have to remain R2, it's just if they are R2 or R3, they would have to meet that density
And
standard.
those property owners could not build a single family on the R2 zoning.
If it was a vacant lot.
That's correct.
If it was a vacant lot, if I owned 5 acres, owned R2, and it was a vacant lot, and I've owned it, and now I've retired, and I want to move up here, I'm required to build not only my house, but I'd have 8 or 7 or 8 or up to 12 other units on the same property to comply, or I
Okay.
couldn't get a permit.
That's right. So then, could he ask for a rezone?
He could,
Good, you have to go through the
Then
whole
they'd
process.
have to go through that rezone.
that process.
I know we've discussed this, and the objective had been when you have to allow for multifamily
Right.
parcels.
Multifamily
And
development.
and some neighborhoods don't want multifamily parcels. They want just single family.
Well, it just establishes minimum density. It is possible, I suppose, for different kinds of housing products to meet the minimum density standard, 60%. In fact, some of the standards that we've seen in other housing elements is much higher than that. It's upwards of 75 or 80.
But it's by parcel, not by subdivision.
That's correct. I mean, it could be part of a subdivision as well. It could be both.
Okay. George, by accepting this now, does that mean it can or be changed when you amend the zoning code? This is just a recommendation.
Well, this does not change anything by itself. This essentially
Correct. It's just-
says you will go through this process to amend the code.
Got it.
And that goes through a
Through
public
its
hearing
own
process with the
public-
planning commission and here
Got
at the
it.
board.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
It
you.
sets the wheels in motion.
Let's see what'll come back.
In addition, the density bonus question that you had, that too is state law, it's well established. I think the reason why the details aren't in the housing element is because that law has a tendency to change from time to time. In fact, it's constantly changing. So what we would bring forward is something that's consistent with the current state law, and that's it. And it's a fairly liberal bonus, actually, upwards of 35% on an individual property.
I'm going to get back real quick to what you just said. If we adopt this today, and when you come back to us in 6 months, we have a chance to readdress this issue with the zoning?
Absolutely.
Because I'm dead against it.
I understand.
Okay? And this will be on that item ticket for us to relook at.
It actually,
We're not locking ourselves into...
it doesn't approve any individual zoning amendment at this point. All it says is that we will go away and go through the process to amend the code, and the process involves the Planning Commission and you as the decision maker.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Mr. White, on that particular scenario that Supervisor Toffanelli was talking about, wouldn't it be technically possible to do a workaround? I mean, we're talking about the kind of potentially a very unusual scenario that we're describing here. If a person has a 1-acre parcel and it's got an R3 designation, historically it's been seen that the density kind of relates to value. So if you purposely downzone it to build one house where you could build 12, that's sort of like shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, that's been my experience, that if you have a 1-acre zone and it's zoned single family, your objective would be to get the zoning more dense so you could build 12.
Right.
But having said that, wouldn't it also be possible to do a workaround? I mean, you could phase the project. I mean, if your desire was to build a single-family residence on there, you could come in and you say, okay, Mr. White, I've got 1 acre and I'm going to build one house in phase 1, and you just never build the other 11. So.
Well, I guess that's theoretically possible. Again, I think we'd have to comment on that when the project came forward and probably understand what sort of level of certainty we had that the project would actually occur the way it was proposed.
Well,
but you're correct. I mean, that is a possibility. I don't think that's the desire necessarily, but the possibility.
Well, but I just wanted to point out to Supervisor Toffanelli that it's not like you're absolutely being forced to build 12 houses when your objective would be to build one.
But your tentative map would have to address that, though, and show phase 1, phase 2. I mean, there's added cost here. In my opinion, if you're a residential zone and you own the property, you should be able to put your house on that property.
I'm not going to argue with you. I think you're exactly right, but there would be ways that you could do it. Okay, a number of other things kind of jump to the forefront here. I take great comfort in the fact that the stakeholders group is so widely distributed as far as their backgrounds and motivations, and what we have before us is a year's worth of work with all of these people. So if I didn't have the respect that I have for the people that I see out there, I'd be much more skeptical about the product than I am. I've also got a lot of respect for Peter and Al and Tanya and all the people that have raised their hand and are telling us to beware what you're approving here, particularly about if we approve this, we're going to contribute to all this corruption. I'm not sure what is defined as corruption. I certainly don't want to vote for anything that would result in this massive amount of corruption that is being suggested here. Maybe we could get together later and you could describe to me what the pitfalls might be. This huge. I mean, I just don't see considering what I said before about the quality of the people that have produced the document, I don't see the potential for corruption. And Mr. Turno, is that your last name? Tuno, okay. He kind of reacted a little violently to my suggestion.
Violently?
Well, loudly.
You need to get out more. You think that's
Okay, please, Mr. Thomas has the floor. Mr. Thomas.
Well, Madam Chairman, I kind of get the impression that there are times when, you just, no matter what you say, you will be, criticized by one side of the room or the other. I mean, I meant no offense when I was just simply pointing out that I have heard loud criticism of this county for not complying with the housing element from 5 to 7 years ago, because it's emphatically stated that you haven't built as many units as you said you were going to build. And as a decision maker here, we can't mandate that people go out and build things that there's no market for. I think that that's what I was trying to imply, that there's I think lofty expectations in the document, getting back to what Supervisor Walensky said, and I'm very sympathetic about that. I come from a very, I don't know, I might say poverty-stricken background myself, and I'm certainly not unaware of how people have to get by within their means. And I grew up in a little 700-square-foot house, and very proudly. So I think that it certainly we would be in good stead if we promote that type of opportunities in this county. Create spots where they can be built and that they fit into the surrounding neighborhood, and people have an opportunity to enjoy the benefits of home ownership. So I don't have any hesitation voting to support this. And that concludes my comment.
I want to address some of the comments and my thoughts. One, the comment about the first-time home owner program. The real estate community of Calaveras County has been very supportive of the first-time home buyer program, and I thought it was a good marriage between funding that was available and the work of the real estate community in finding loans for first-time home buyer program. It allowed people to get into homes. In addition, the Calaveras County Board of Realtors has a fund. Now, you can probably address it more than I could, where they help first-time home buyers get into homes and paying for closing costs. So I think that's been a very positive program in Calaveras County. The funding that came from the county, we were just a conduit that allowed that funding to come through. Resources, funds of Calaveras County taxpayers were not used for that program. Earlier it was discussed about the economic element. We want an economic element. There's probably no one in here who hasn't said they want more shopping. Well, when you have retail or jobs that pay $8 to $15 an hour and you don't allow apartments in your neighborhood, well then don't ask for jobs that only pay in the $8 to $15 range if you're not going to have a housing job balance. And so we have had 2 developers that I can think of at the moment that have come in here and proposed apartments, and the community went into a catatonic fit that there would be apartments in their neighborhood, and you know what kind of people come with apartments. Well, up in Ebbets Pass Corridor, we have apartment complex, we have Section 8 housing, and they're lovely. I mean, do they have any problems? Yeah, they got problems, and so does the subdivision that I live in, which Mr. Tryon always refers to as a gated community. So there's nothing wrong with apartments, and probably many of us at one time or another lived in them. So,
and how much do you pay the guard at the gate, Marita?
almost as much as we pay you, Tryon. Do you need a job?
Well, then he doesn't need a subsidy.
There's your job when you leave here.
So Mr. Segali always refers to market forces. Well, the market has been asking for apartments. And when apartments have come to the board or to the planning commission, the communities in which they're located have turned them down. That, to me, is unacceptable. And part of that goes back to the one that Gary talked about, if you have an R2 or R3 and you can't build a single family. Part of that came out of that you want to have something where you can have multifamily. We had one that was so controversial, the developer turned it from apartments to condos, and then it became okay. Well, I mean, it's going back to what Steve says. What does that say about us as a community? So if you keep wanting to ask for shopping, or you keep wanting to ask for restaurants, and you keep wanting, we, all of us, then you need to have a housing balance that goes with that. In terms of energy efficiency, that saves all of us money. There's always the return on investment, whether it's a PG&E program, whether it's a CCWD program, whether you insulate your house, you have a return on that investment of money. And most of us these days all live in insulated homes, and if we don't, we wish we did. And if we do, and your home's 25 years old, you wish you could upgrade the insulation. And then we have double for up in my area. Those of us with single pane are now wanting double pane, and those with double pane now want double pane low E, because it saves on my monthly bill, so there's a return on investment. And this room has also been packed with contractors and homeowners who want to participate in AB 811, which is the energy retrofit program, so we can again borrow money, have the energy retrofit done now, and pay it back on our property tax bill over a 5, 10, or 20-year period. The community's asking for those things. So what difference is it for those of us who have homes and want to be energy efficient, even if it's not for altruistic reasons to save the earth, it's to save on our monthly utility bills. In terms of Supervisor Tryon went on and on about doing the minimum and so forth, and the general fund's going to go broke. Well, Mr. Tryon has been part of zoning changes and ordinances in this boardroom that have been funded by the general plan. The general fund. And are we broke? Well, no, we're close to it. But these things are not going to cause the county to be broke. When we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on the ag zoning changes. And the ag zoning changes were paid for by the general fund. So, it depends on which side of the issue is where Mr. Tryon is. So I'm more than happy to tell him that it was okay for the ag community to have the general fund pay for, but it's not okay for building green. In terms of partnerships, we were criticized that water and wastewater are not the jurisdiction of the county. But again, if you have a project that comes to the county, you have to have a will serve letter. So it automatically makes the county and the water district partners. So whether we want to be partners or not, we are. And the reality is that we should be partners. To get a project done, be it residential, commercial, industrial, it's a marriage of all the utilities involved. And we keep talking, again, over and over, about having infrastructure. And every one of the community plan meetings that I went to, all over Calaveras County, all of us have said, infrastructure is important. Now, if we think infrastructure is not, and we shouldn't care about water and sewer, I mean, that's something I guess we could consider. It's not something that I want to consider because I don't think that's where the communities are. We've wanted two things, infrastructure, and we've wanted to keep a sense of a rural community, whatever that looks like in respective areas. So I think it's important that we have the partnership with our water and our sewer districts. And I say that multifold because if we didn't, we probably wouldn't have projects. So, and then one other thing is the excitement is having the bride and groom here, and we're not going to have a divorce. We're going to have, before we got married, we're going to have a marriage. And that's what all of your comments are about, and this is the start of the process. And we have many opportunities as we go along to deal with some of the ordinances or the zone changes or the land uses, some of which Gary talked about. And he has a concern, I have, and I think all of us have. So unless there's any further comments from the staff, I'd like to move this along. We have a 1:30 study session. Any other comments from the board? I'd like to then ask for a motion on a resolution adopting the negative deck for the 2010 public hearing draft housing element.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Passes on a 4-1. Supervisor Tryon in the negative. I'd like to move to the second resolution amending the Calaveras County General Plan and adopting the 2010 public hearing draft housing element update. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Passes on a 4-1. The other is to give authority to the planning director to submit this to the state. There is no resolution on that. It's just direction. If you would like Supervisor Tryon to, I'm sure he'd be happy to give it to the state. I'll see if he still was with me.
I'm sure you'd be happy to send it.
Is there any problem with directing the,
Well, why don't you pull the board? It's asking for direction.
well, it's just George, will you mail it? Russ, you got a problem with that?
Absolutely not.
Gary?
No.
Yes.
And 4-1. You could take Mr. Tryon with you. Okay.
Stamp on him?
Yeah. I'd like to thank you very much, staff.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And to the public, we thank you also. I'd like to move to, I don't have my agenda, but I think it is to board assignments, meetings,
Board what?
correspondence.
You talked about a study session. We got closed session.
We have a closed session on study session.
And we have a study session.
Oh, take a recess.
Talk about. Could the board still in session, please? Russ? Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute recess. We could, Jeannie, maybe I'll